So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Michelle Maddox. I'm a clinical consultant with Omni-Biotic, and I'm here today with Dr. Kadish. Dr. Kadish runs a concierge clinic called the Center of Health in Corvallis, Oregon. He's a naturopathic physician, and I'm really excited to hear his case study today. So, Dr. Kadish, can you tell us a little bit about your case?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is going to be the classic rabbit hole. This is a 24-year-old white female who literally spent a year in pain having vulvitis that was consistent, persistent, and non-remitting to typical approaches. So let's talk about where things started, how we interceded, and ultimately how there was some resolution. There is ultimately a year and a half later.
Oh, wow.
Yes, a year and a half later, some resolution. So this individual, just to give you some overview, is someone who I have a fair knowledge of in terms of having seen her as a patient since she was 9 years old. So history, she is a clean living individual who literally takes health to a very high degree, both in terms of dietary interventions, in terms of hygiene, well-educated, doing well, low stress in general. So you'd think all of the parameters would be in her favor. Maybe, but maybe not. All right. So I have in front of me a long list of what was done because we tried the obvious. So from boric acid suppositories to over-the-counter probiotics, to oral probiotics, then some monostat, then some metronidazole, done multiple ways, both orally and topically, vinegar douches, niacin cream, a little acyclovir just to see if that might have been a piece, a product that some of you may be familiar with called Good Clean Love, the Flourish Vaginal Care System, fluconazole. Then there was for a very short period, because the itchiness was rather substantial, a little bit of a steroid. And then there were some questions that I certainly posed, as this was a combination of both a discharge that suggested and ultimately was tested as being both candida as well as BV. So Gardner-Vella showed up multiple times. So we do have objective findings and did do timed testing between therapeutics. So after she had apparently seen an OBGYN and did her own Googling and what have you, she finally threw her hands up and said, help, I need help. Let's find alternative, whatever number in this case, probably G or H, no, probably more than that. With that said, I said, I've been familiar with a product that I'm using on some other clients that may have an impact. Many of the probiotics, we did a little bit of educational business, i.e., just because it's 50 billion whatevers doesn't necessarily cut it. Let's try plan B. We'll use a different product and see if we get some response. So Omni-Biotic was kind enough to offer us two different approaches. The first place that I approached this was the balance. I will tell you that the balance didn't work.
Yeah.
In this business, it didn't work. We then did a consult and they suggested the AB10. So to make a long story short, the conversation went, well, okay, I'll give it a try. We'll see what happens. Maybe there's something out there. This poor woman was literally pulling her hair out going, I want to have intercourse. This is ridiculous. I can't be sitting scratching all day long. This isn't working for me. The discharge just between obviously the various pharmaceutical products did vary. So it appeared that we had made some positive impact, obviously upsetting the vaginal balance because of the antibiotic use. Even with the other probiotics she used, there was really no reset. With the original balance, there was a minimal impact, not gross, but a minimal impact that seemed to be helpful. Adequate, no, but a good start. Then what we did was we obviously went over again and again, maybe part of this problem is blood sugar issue. We actually did check. It wasn't. I handed her a glucometer, said, here, go knock yourself out, stick yourself alive. Nothing was amiss. There was some blood work done in between this, nothing Nothing was amiss. There was the classic discharge that was white. It was a little chunky at times, of course, reflected more of the candida. Other times, depending on where she was in her cycle, it would be thinner and have a slightly different odor. So back, we started with the AB10 in October of 21. So again, this is a very long road going back and forth. But typically, just so everyone understands, even with all of these various interventions, pharmaceutically in particular, very little response and for very little time. So none of them was really, really making it happen. And in between this, the testing still showed Barbarella and or Candida were present. Okay, so at that point, I said, look, you've tried everything under the sun. We can't keep antibioticing the daylights out of anyone. I don't care who gives you the antibiotics. It's not the approach that we should take.
Right.
We're missing something. Interesting, one of the side notes is that has been consistently a denier of her allergies. So it turns out—
Is that seasonal or like food?
Food related.
Ah.
So we obviously at that point had the conversation. Maybe it's time to go a little bit further. It would be your advantage. And indeed, she was pretty responsive to that because obviously she needed another alternative. Yeah. With that said, she did cut out the dairy and there was some reactivity to eggs. This was shown in an IgE way back. And it's pretty classic between her sisters and her mom.
Got it.
So not terribly surprising. No, it was not elevated to the point of extreme, but it would make sense to remove the potentially offending agent.
Well, an IgE reaction is, I mean, that's an IgE reaction and should be removed, you know? It's very different than a sensitivity.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, she put this, let's see, it was 6 weeks. I'm just again reading, I've got incredibly good notes here. So for 6 weeks, she tried AB10.
And how did she take the AB10? How was that administered?
Initially, actually the balance, let's back up to the balance, the first step. She did that exclusively orally. For the AB10, we took and did a divided dosing both on a tampon as half the dose, as well as orally. So she was getting this both directions, so obviously influencing both gut and vaginal bacterial milieu.
And for the tampon, did you have her use an organic kind of risk cotton? Okay.
Oh yeah. No, we're with the program. She was totally with it. She understood exactly how, who, what, where. She was very responsive. The only time it wasn't used was when she was actually having some menstruation. Other than that, she was totally good with that. Awesome. So she definitely noticed that the discharge was less, and it did seem to make an impact. So that's the good news.
And she used it for how long? And was it daily?
This was 6 weeks. Let me just read through. In 6 weeks, let's see. During the cycle, she was using the tampon in addition to between. So what happened was, this is an interesting side note, and I quote, on the 5th day, my period started and the itchiness ramped up again. So it had resolved to some extent and then ramped back up. For the next 17 days, I was just as itchy as when I started. And the discharge was thick, off-white, smelly, slightly fermented. And then, now this is the curious part, and I don't have an explanation. There's no good, aha, we've got it, the light bulb went off. It started getting better, but she got even thicker, clumpy discharge. So then she said she wasn't really sure that it was doing anything. She was pretty discouraged, obviously. She had seen some change. Then it resolved back to the original circumstance. And here she was going, I'm putting weeks into this. I put years into this and we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
So she was pretty darn frustrated.
Yeah.
What she did find, though, is that she stopped the AB10. Now, this is 6 weeks of use. A month later, and I quote, at the end of December, I noticed a significant improvement. Now, you've got to ask the question, what other potentials might have been a confounding factor? There were none. I literally racked my brain, asked her a gazillion questions.
Hmm.
This is a very adept individual. This is someone who you want as a client.
Yeah, the dream
And
client.
she literally, we went down dietary, exposures from, you name it, A to Z. Was there stress reduction? Was there different partners? And there weren't. None of the obvious factors that you would experience literally made sense. Also, during this whole time, she and her partner stopped having intercourse. She actually dropped the partner. And so there was no other irritation that would have been present during literally the AB10 time. So that was out of the picture. She literally changed all of her clothing for 6 or 8 months prior to this. It was cotton, loose, all of the pieces you would absolutely want your client to use. And she did it all, and it didn't make a difference. So, and I quote, so I was able to, and then it gets more interesting. So here she is, a month later, she stopped. She's frustrated, she stopped, and it starts receding, all the symptoms. So do we know what it was? We could theorize, but I'm not sure I know.
Yeah.
It then goes on that she was actually able to have intercourse with her partner again, yay for good things, and it still was okay at the 80+% mark, not 100%, and I quote, not 100%. So she then asked, interestingly, because she thought it might be the AB10, and I quote, I would like to try the AB10 method again, see if it clears up the last bit of it. What did we do? We went back to the AB10. So then we're months later. So this is, again, the rabbit hole of extended period of time, to say the least. She did it for another 6 weeks. She hasn't tried, and I quote, this is going back to December. She didn't try anything additionally. And she is, and I quote, 80% better, which is, and I quote, which is huge. I am super happy. No kidding. Well, again, this patient had been clawing at herself and pruritic for an extended period of time. I was in touch with her recently, and she has told me that she's probably at about 95, 98%.
That's awesome.
So, 2 years of absolute, oh my goodness, this is the pits. There's got to be a better option here. She's had other partners since, and she's still at 95+%. She says it's really, truly, she's got to think about it at this point versus a daily impactful, oh my goodness, how am I going to live?
And is she still doing the part on a tampon and part orally?
Nope. No, this is the interesting part. So I think what happened, my gross conceptual belief system on this is we needed to have a much more impactful probiotic into the picture. Clearly, throwing all the antibiotics and everything else was not going in the direction that would ultimately result in any long-term situation that was going to be pleasant or appropriate. I think the reset from the AB10 was what really did it, because that's when things changed. The balance was not it. It didn't work. I mean, it worked partially, but just
wasn't strong enough
to maybe take an edge off. So maybe you had a little decrease in inflammation. Maybe there were a couple of cytokines influenced, great, wonderful, but not enough to make the deal, or the microbiome slightly modified. So having the AB10 in part with the combination, internal, both in terms of gastrointestinal and vaginal, really was the bottom line. It reset enough, even after, let's see, I mean, there's about 7, and again, I came in after the fact on some of this. There were probably 7 or 8 uses of antibiotics in between all this.
Oh, wow.
I know, and all of them were, you know, it wasn't a one-day take a fluconazole, call it good. It was far greater than that. So you can imagine that what I suspect happened was the microbiome was totally trashed. She landed up with, obviously, the incorrect approach to things in general, both topically and internally. And by doing the AB10 over an extended period of time, we actually were able to move the ball forward. And then her natural system, no longer being affected by external agents, literally allowed things to find a homeostatic parameter that made things work.
Yeah, it's almost as if it reminds me of conversations around reseeding. So using the blend, right? So you're helping her gut microbiome orally. And of course, we know that the gut microbiome absolutely influences the vaginal microbiome, but also with the the AB10 on the tampon, you get a little bit of a direct reseed to kind of help that vaginal microbiome come back to homeostasis, which seems to be what she needed.
So I think that's what really took place was, again, she had used over-the-counter products, both orally and otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
That was a no-brainer. Didn't work. The boric acid, good start, great idea, no cigar.
Yeah.
Multiple courses of antibiotics. We just literally may have gotten the Gardnerella down, but ultimately through more grenades into the milieu, it wasn't the right approach, literally. Mm-hmm. And here we are 2 years later, and she has continued to be well. And the homeostatic reset worked.
That's excellent.